Secret links between the Rosicrucian Freemasonic Memoriae, containing 32 verses dedicated to Francis Bacon as Shakespeare, the first folio of the Shakespeare works, and the Stratford monument. In the months following the death of Francis Bacon to the world, his trusted Rosicrucian brother, Dr. William Rawley, gathered together and published a commemorative work in his honour entitled the Memoriae, also known as the Memoriae Verulamii. This rare volume contains 32 Latin verses in praise of Bacon, which his orthodox biographers and editors have simply passed over, ignored or suppressed, that portray Bacon as a secret supreme poet and dramatist, writer of comedies and tragedies under the pseudonym of Shakespeare. The Church of England clergyman Dr. William Rawley knew the truth and secrets of the concealed and hidden life of whom the world and posterity know as Francis Bacon. He served as his daily instrument to Bacon, assisting him, as he tells us, in the composing of his works for many years together, especially in his writing time. I conceived that no man could pretend a better interest or claim to the ordering of them after his death than myself. Dr. Rawley lived with Bacon for the last 10 years of his known life, and was one of his good pens residing at Gorhambury with poet and dramatist Ben Jonson and poet George Herbert, at the time when the Shakespeare First Folio was working its way through the Jaggard family printing presses. For his love and support in translating De Augmentis Scientiarum, published within days of the Shakespeare's First Folio, his Rosicrucian Freemasonic Grandmaster Bacon dedicated to Herbert with warmth and gratitude the translation of certain psalms into English verse in 1625. Dr. Rawley also assisted Bacon in translating and producing the De Augmentis Scientiarum, for which he provided the preface to the work that was published shortly before the Shakespeare First Folio in 1623. Three years later, Dr. Rawley also published Silva Silvarum and New Atlantis in a single volume, the coeval of the Fama Fraternitatis being the first Rosicrucian manifesto of the secret brotherhood of which Dr. Rawley was a member under his beloved master, Lord Bacon. Around the emblem on the title page of the New Atlantis set forth by Dr. Rawley appears the following inscription: "In time the hidden truth will be revealed." Following Lord Bacon's supposed death, Dr. Rawley continued to edit, translate and publish numerous editions of his works, culminating in the Resuscitata, to which he prefixed the first English life of Lord Bacon. In his address to the reader, in strict accordance with the precepts laid down by his Rosicrucian master, Rawley primes the initiated. In regard of the distance of the time since his lordship's days, whereby I shall not tread too near upon the heels of truth, or of the passages and persons then concerned. As revealing as the remarkable Memoriae verses already are, in his address to the reader, Dr. Rawley plainly states that he has deliberately withheld other verses from public view, consistent with his statement in the preface to the Resuscitata, wherein he stated, "There are some things that are not openly communicable to the public. For very many poems, and the best too, I withhold from publication." It is obvious enough from the above statements that Dr. Rawley was privy to the secrets of the life of his Rosicrucian master, Lord Bacon, and as will be seen from these very special Memoriae verses, that he knew he was the supreme poet and dramatist Shakespeare. The third verse in the Memoriae is penned by his inward friend, the metaphysical poet George Herbert, a member of the important and powerful Herbert family. The relationship between the Bacons and Herberts went back generations over a period of more than 50 years to at least the very beginning of the Elizabethan reign. It was to his inward and secret friend, the protector of his private life, William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, and his brother Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery, in gratitude for all that had passed between them, Bacon, in the names of Hemmings and Condell, dedicated his immortal Shakespeare First Folio. During the period leading up to the publication of the Shakespeare First Folio, when George Herbert was living with Bacon at Gorhambury, his cousin William Herbert, dedicatee of the First Folio, was then occupying Solomon's chair in his divine capacity of Grand Master of England. The secrecy shared between George Herbert and his cousins William and Philip about Bacon's hidden life and writings, including his authorship of the Shakespeare First Folio, further extended to another member of the Herbert family. In an earlier draft of Bacon's will, printed by his second editor and member of his Rosicrucian Freemasonry Brotherhood, Dr. Tennyson, in Baconiana, headed "A Transcript out of the Lord Bacon's last will, relating especially to his writings," a Mr. Herbert was charged with overseeing the publication or suppression of his manuscripts. Ordinarily, of course, Bacon would not have named such an inexperienced barrister as one of his literary executors. But Edward Herbert was no ordinary lawyer. He was the cousin of William and Philip Herbert, the joint dedicatees of the Shakespeare First Folio. This means that Edward Herbert, along with John Selden, Sir William Boswell, Bishop John Williams, all designated by Bacon in the two versions of the Last Will and Testament, as well as Dr. William Rawley, had access to his literary manuscripts, including the manuscripts of his Shakespeare plays, some or all of them used for his Shakespeare First Folio. It was only a little over a year after the publication of his Shakespeare First Folio that Bacon started preparing for his final Last Will and Testament. After consultations with those close to him and dealing with some practical arrangements, he commenced the formal process of making a will on the 23rd of May 1625, of such detail and complexity that it was not completed until 6 months later in the December. With an eye firmly fixed on posterity, Bacon magnificently addressed himself to the world and future ages. For my name and memory I leave it to men's charitable speeches, and to foreign nations and the next ages. His address to future ages was followed in his Last Will and Testament by an instruction still shrouded in secrecy, that would have implications for the next 4 centuries, one which is still very much in play to the present day. I desire my executors, especially my brother John Constable and also Mr. Boswell, presently after my decease, to take into their hands all my papers whatsoever, which are either in cabinets, boxes, or presses, and them to seal up until they may at leisure peruse them. In what Spedding describes as a sequel or postscript to the will, Bacon wrote a revealing and instructive letter to Bishop Williams, directing him to the use and suppression of his orations and epistles. My speeches perhaps you will think fit to publish. The letters, many of them, touch too much upon late matters of state to be published, yet I was willing that they should not be lost. His inward friend and Rosicrucian brother, Sir William Boswell, a literary executor of Bacon's will, to whom he bestowed many of his unpublished Latin and English writings, likens Bacon in his verse contributed to the Memoriae to the goddess of law Themis and the Greek goddess Pallas Athena, the shaker of the spear, from whom Bacon adopted the pseudonym Shakespeare. Prefixed to the French edition of the Wisdom of the Ancients, set forth by Jean Baudouin, whose contact with Bacon stretched back to before 1619, is an important frontispiece little known outside of specialist Baconian scholars. The frontispiece depicts Pallas Athena, the goddess of knowledge and wisdom, brandishing or shaking a spear, alluding to Bacon's nom de plume Shakespeare. Above her head, on which Pallas Athena is seen wearing her helmet of invisibility, and on her shield of truth appear two mottos. Truth is enveloped in obscurity, and thus it shines in the shadows. Bacon's co-literary executor, Bishop Williams, to whom Bacon bequeathed his letters and speeches, likens Bacon in his verse in the Memoriae to Apollo, god of poetry and leader of the 9 Muses. In the Memoriae verses, Bacon is repeatedly called another Apollo, described as greater than Apollo, and where it is said Apollo was fearful, Bacon would replace him as king of the Muses. In the verses, the Muses are directly referred to on 13 occasions. How has it happened to us, the disciples of the Muses, that Apollo, the leader of our choir, should die? O Bacon, as much as you have given to the world and to the Muses, and you who were able to immortalise the Muses, could you die yourself, O Bacon? During the time the Shakespeare First Folio was being printed by William and Isaac Jaggard, its co-editor Ben Jonson, then living with Bacon at Gorhambury, contributed the famous verse, "To the memory of my beloved, the author, Mr. William Shakespeare," above which stands the Rosicrucian Freemasonic 7 set squares headpiece. In the enigmatic and revealing verse, for those with eyes to see, Ben hails Shakespeare, whom he secretly knows is Bacon, as Apollo, the 10th muse leader of the other 9 muses. He was not of an age, but for all time, and all the muses still were in their prime, when like Apollo he came forth to warm our cares, or like a Mercury to charm. In the same verse, with his customary dexterity, and using his powers of guile and ambiguity, Ben repeatedly alludes to the secret identity of his beloved author, Bacon-Shakespeare, who he compares all that Greece and Rome has to offer. In his posthumously published Meditations, Timber, or Discoveries, Jonson again writes of his Rosicrucian master, Lord Bacon, by repeating the wording he used for him in his verse prefixed to the Shakespeare First Folio. With his Rosicrucian Freemasonic Grandmaster Bacon, Rare Ben had a love of anagrams, and he thoughtfully inserted one in the last 6 lines of his verse, communicating a secret message to posterity regarding the true identity of our immortal poet Shakespeare, by spelling out down the left-hand side his name, Bacon. In the Memoriae verses, as we have seen, Bacon is repeatedly referred to as Apollo, the 10th muse, leader of the 9 muses of poetry. He is the author of the precious gem of concealed literature, a poet and dramatist who wrote comedies and tragedies. In the final elegy, Bacon's inward friend, the poet and dramatist Thomas Randolph, one of the sons of Ben Jonson, refers to Bacon as Quirinus, confirming that Bacon is our secret supreme poet and dramatist Shakespeare. He taught the Pegasean arts to grow, as grew the spear of Quirinius, spearman, i.e. Shakespeare, swiftly into a laurel tree. Therefore, since he had taught the Heliconian goddesses to flourish, no lapse of ages shall dim his glory. The ardour of his noble heart could beat no longer that you, divine Minerva, Pallas Athena, the shaker of the spear, who wore a helmet which rendered her invisible, should be despised. His godlike pen restored your wonted honour, and, as another Apollo, leader of the 9 Muses, presiding over the different kinds of poetry and liberal arts, dispelled the clouds that hid you. One of the critically important commendatory verses prefixed to the Shakespeare First Folio was composed by the now mostly overlooked poet Leonard Digges. Digges and Bacon were related, and both of them were related to Sir Henry Neville. During the 1590s, Sir Henry Neville the Younger moved in the Bacon-Essex circles in and around Essex House on the Strand. His nephew, Sir Henry Neville, makes an appearance on the outer cover of Bacon's collection of manuscripts, known as the Northumberland manuscript, that originally held copies of his 2 Shakespeare plays, Richard II and Richard III. Leonard Digges contributed a verse to the First Folio, to the memory of the deceased author, Master William Shakespeare. As with the poet and dramatist Ben Jonson, the poet and translator Leonard Digges was privy to the secret that Bacon was the concealed author of the Shakespeare works. It will be observed that the first line of the verse contains 39 letters, F. Bacon in simple cipher, and the last line has 33 letters, Bacon in simple cipher. Digges's verse contains the earliest known reference to the Stratford monument, so beloved of orthodox Shakespeare scholars. However, if we examine it more closely, we are able to discern that Digges, in his Rosicrucian Freemasonic method of delivery, hints at the truth. He tells us that his works will outlive this carefully crafted illusion, and when time dissolves thy Stratford monument, the hidden truth will be revealed to the world, in words similar to those printed on the title page of Bacon's New Atlantis. In time, the hidden truth will be revealed. It seems the Stratford monument was erected some time before or around 1623. The monument is attached to the north wall of the chancel in Holy Trinity Church, overlooking the presumed grave of William Shakespeare, which bears an epitaph but remarkably no name. For 4 centuries, a whole phalanx of Stratfordian Shakespeare scholars have not produced any evidence or shed any light on who was responsible for commissioning the Shakespeare Stratford monument, which is a Rosicrucian Freemasonic memorial secretly commissioned by Francis Bacon. On the present-day tablet of the Stratford monument there is the following engraving. A free translation of the Latin inscription at the head of the monument is given by B. Rowland Lewis. Him who in judgment was a Nestor, in intellect was a Socrates, in art was a Virgil, the earth encloses, the populace mourn, and Olympus holds. Similar sentiments to those expressed in the Latin inscription on the Stratford monument are very closely echoed by several verses in the Memoriae. The first line of the English verse beneath it on the Stratford monument reads, "Stay, passenger, why goest thou by so fast?" In the Memoriae verses we have, "Your fame adheres not to sculptured columns, nor is read on the tomb, stay, traveller, your steps." And again in another verse, "Stay your advance and leave to posterity what will delight the coming ages to discover." Hundreds of thousands of scholars, students and tourists travel from all around the globe to visit Stratford-upon-Avon and the Shakespeare Monument to pay homage to the greatest poet and dramatist in the history of the world, but are not able to see and comprehend what is hidden in plain sight in front of their own eyes. The full Rosicrucian Freemasonic significance of the Shakespeare monument at Stratford, which is known to learned members of the Brotherhood, has been concealed, hidden and suppressed for the last 400 years. This systematic silence was recently overturned by Peter Dawkins, director of the Francis Bacon Research Trust, a recognised authority on the Rosicrucian Freemasonry Brotherhood, who, by his own admission, is not a Freemason, in his groundbreaking article, The Symbolism, Mystery and Secret Message of the Shakespeare Monument. It was also addressed by M.R. Osborne in his 112-page work, Allegrine Stone. In contrast to Dawkins, while Osborne, a descendant of the Shakespeare family, was apparently not a Baconian, he is a member of the secretive Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, whose admission rules require that its members have achieved the rank of Master Mason of a Grand Lodge under the auspices of the Grand Lodge of England. The Shakespeare monument is replete with Rosicrucian Freemasonry symbolism. There are the two putti, a representation of a naked child or cherub, above the monument, representing Adam's labour with the trowel, symbolically used to spread brotherly love among humankind, a key tool of modern speculative Freemasonry. The sandstone skull, a profoundly Masonic symbol situated at the top of the monument, reminds us of the Grand Lodge above is never far away. The hidden secret of the Shakespeare monument is that it is, in truth, a Rosicrucian memorial, and we need only consider the trowel and spear in the monument and the three working tools of the poet in the frieze, the quill, pen, page and cushion he needed to sit on a while working, to recognise the quasi-Freemasonic symbolism. The Shakespeare monument is a Baconian Rosicrucian Freemasonic cryptogram, concealing and revealing its hidden architect and secret author of the Shakespeare poems and plays. It is, as Dawkins, an internationally recognised authority on Bacon-Shakespeare and his Rosicrucian Freemasonry Brotherhood, points out, a critical gateway into the very heart of the mystery of Shakespeare, which when fully revealed has very far-reaching consequences that will demand the rewriting of history and change forever the face of Baconian Shakespearean scholarship. In the drawing by Sir William Dugdale, carefully engraved by Wenceslas Holler, published in the Antiquities of Warwickshire, Shakespeare is depicted appearing to clutch a sack without, as appears in the familiar Shakespeare monument, resting his left hand on a paper laid on a cushion with his right hand holding a quill. The sack, observes Dawkins, is clearly a wool sack. The Dugdale drawing of the Shakespeare monument appears to have been designed to draw notice to its Masonic significance, for the arms of Shakespeare are shown in a most awkward but stylised way, which immediately draws attention. These arms are disposed such that they portray the geometrical form of the Masonic square and compass, the single most universally identifiable symbol of Freemasonry. The upper arms and head form the compass, i.e. part or set of compasses, the lower arms and hands the square. To substitute a wool sack for a cushion is of great Baconian Rosicrucian Freemasonic significance, because the most famous wool sack is the seat of the Lord Chancellor. Bacon was Lord Chancellor of England, while presiding over the House of Lords. The lion shown crowning the pillars alludes to the lion's paw, the grip used in the third-degree ritual to resurrect or raise up the Freemason from darkness into light. As it is now seen, the Shakespeare monument depicts the purported image of the Stratford man with a blank or vacant expression, not unlike the Droeshout on the first folio, with a quill pen in his right hand, with his left hand resting upon a single blank sheet of paper on a tessellated cushion. The blank sheet on the monument indicates that the actor William Shakespeare has never written anything in his whole life, no Shakespeare poems or plays, and at the same time throws a sidelight on his lack of education and illiteracy. A tessellated cushion is what we would expect to see, discloses Dawkins, on the seat of a Grand Master of Freemasonry. The cushion on the monument, he observes, is depicted with golden tassels at its four corners and a gold cord around it linking the tassels. In Freemasonry, the lodge floor and the tracing board each have a tessellated border consisting of a cord connecting four tassels, one at each of the four corners. The tassels represent the four cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. The Shakespeare Stratford monument, which knowingly echoes several of the verses in the Memoriae, like the first folio that is dedicated to the Grand Master of England, is replete with Baconian, Rosicrucian, Freemasonic symbolism, codes and ciphers, which read and deciphered repeatedly reveal and confirm that Bacon is Shakespeare.